Hey, my name is Justin, and I am a part of Hacker Relay. And today we're going to be doing a talk I've given probably a dozen times, and usually it's like an hour or two. So I'm going to try and really condense this down to 10 minutes about 7 things we've learned about getting hired, given all of the data that we have and all the hiring managers that we've talked to. Now, one of the things that I want to say up front is if you're a hiring manager or if this has not been your experience, I apologize. This is not the end all be all. This has just been some of the information that we've collected and when talking to hiring managers. So every day you learn something new. And so this is sort of the data and perspective that we have based on the data that we have. So that being said, let's go ahead and dive into this. So first things first is logistics are your enemy. And so what do I mean by that? So if you think about all of the resumes that are given to a hiring manager, so in some cases we're talking thousands, 2 or 3,000 resumes. Well, of course, let's think about that for a little bit. How would you get 1,000 resumes or 2,000 resumes down to a single candidate? How would you do that? I mean, that's a really tricky question. Like, where would you even start with that? Would you try and use some like analytics, or would you look through the resumes and would you filter by experience or who went to college, or how would you actually filter that out? I mean, it's just a tricky question. And I think this is where a lot of developers misunderstand that this isn't a hiring manager being cruel or them being mean. It just logistically, there's a lot of candidates out there for few roles. And so sometimes it can just be a big challenge. And so that's one thing to kind of keep in mind. And so your goal is for a lot of hiring managers is just how do we weed people out? And I think that's where algorithms typically come in, is it can be a really useful way of just objectively reducing the number of candidates, by 60% by just having them kind of go through this exercise. And then that way, instead of dealing with a big pile, you're dealing with a smaller pile. And that is, again, we're not trying to find a perfect candidate. In some cases, we're just trying to find a smaller pile so I can get through it today. So that's kind of something to keep in mind. And so what is the takeaway here? So the takeaway is just to kind of assume your resume won't be seen. Just go into it, assume your resume won't be seen, and try and skip the traditional flow, because this is all based on the traditional flow. So how can I actually skip this traditional flow and maybe get around this ecosystem that is actually kind of making this really tricky logistical problem for hiring managers and a really tricky problem for developers? Second one is hiring managers love resumes. So like, whoa, what you were just saying is logistics. Yes, but resumes are such a useful tool because you can put them in ATS and filter down. And it is basically the currency of people who are hiring, because it's something you can use, it's tangible, it's an artifact that you can talk about, hand around, and actually use as a mechanism to evaluate people. Even though it's our opinion that resumes are broken and aren't really a good tool, we think there's false positives and false negatives, not really a good indicator. That being said, our data, at least for the hiring managers we talk to, 93% of them say they reject candidates immediately at the resume stage. So this is before they've even talked to you, before they've looked at your portfolio, before they've looked at anything, just at the resume stage. So if you think about it that way, you're like, wow, okay, so I'm not even getting maybe a hacker rank. I'm not even getting an algorithm test, because so many are being immediately rejected at the resume stage. They're being filtered out immediately at the ATS level. That is huge already right there. Also, hiring managers hire specialists. So you think about it this way. Okay, they have a slot with a name on it. Let's say it says front-end developer. So they're hiring for front-end developer. You might have a resume that says you've done back-end, you've made video games, you're all really good at 3D modeling, maybe you're a really good salesperson. That's all great and well, but they're trying to fill a slot. And so the more you can specialize, the easier it is for you to be a perfect person to fill that hole. And so try and be a specialist. But you might feel like you're kind of, you're limiting yourself. But once you actually get into the role, you can be more of a generalist. You can actually showcase all those other skills. But getting in, you want to be the perfect fit for that one slot. So keep that in mind. And so what is the takeaway here? So again, the takeaway is your resume is still super, super important, super, super important. So invest more time in it than you would honestly think you realistically should. Also, try and look at other people's resumes. It's easy to get caught in your own bubble, be thinking, hey, this is the best I can make my resume. And we'll talk more about this later in the talk, but look at other people's resumes, specifically people who are really high up in your field. So maybe if you're a junior developer, looking at a tech lead's resume and actually getting a good understanding of what it looks like, because you kind of want to pass the gut check of when somebody looks at your resume, they think it looks more like a senior resume than looking like a junior resume. Don't apply on LinkedIn. I know that's a controversial take there. Some people have had success on LinkedIn, some people haven't. I think my very first job, I had a recruiter reach out to me on LinkedIn. So I'm definitely not against LinkedIn. However, going and just doing, just apply, isn't the way to go. Because you have to think about, well, why would it be posted on LinkedIn in the first place? Chances are it's because it didn't work to post it other places. Because if you think about it, you have to pay to post it on LinkedIn. In some cases, a lot of money, which a lot of people don't know. And so if they're posting it on here, chances are they've already tried other places, didn't get enough candidates, or didn't get right candidates, or maybe they're just posting it as a formality. And often when you don't necessarily obligated to close a job. In some cases, some people leave their job open way after they've had it filled. And so by actually going to this third-party place to find these jobs, and this doesn't apply to LinkedIn, this applies to a lot of places that they're aggregating jobs, you'll find that the jobs are actually super fresh, super relevant, maybe not even open, and that could be a huge problem. Also, when you actually go to get the jobs from your LinkedIn to ATS, it requires a couple of extra steps. A lot of hiring managers will go and actually look at the results, the actual candidates they got from LinkedIn, click export, 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 and they'll actually export a handful of the candidates from LinkedIn into a CSV and then drag and drop it into their ATS. And so if you think, okay, do I want to be already in their ATS, or do I actually want to be on LinkedIn, actually be trimmed out so early on in the process? So that being said, what is the takeaway? Takeaway is, whenever possible, apply directly on their ATS. It's almost like if you go to, Trivago, or you go one of these trip sites and you get a flight on there. If something goes wrong or if there's issues, it's really, really hard to go to the flight company and say, hey, Delta, I had this issue. They're like, well, that's not my problem. That's your problem. So by being able to go directly to the company, it's going to be directly into their internal system. And if you do have questions or issues, they can go directly into their internal system and see where it went wrong. Versus if you do it on some external site, that's not their problem. And in a lot of cases, it just, again, provides one extra step. And again, timing is super important. Maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe it should be. I don't know. But for a lot of companies, a lot of hiring managers, it's sorted by the time the candidate applied. And usually you'll just go top to bottom until you find a couple of good candidates. And so if you're saying, hey, I want 10 good candidates for me to send a leak code to, then you're going to go top to bottom, and once you find 10, you find 10. You're not going to go through all 2,000. And so being one of the first to apply is super powerful. I would say every hour is 100 candidates or something like that. So you want to be within the first 6 hours to even have a chance. Earlier, the better. There's tips and tricks around that, but I would definitely say having those kind of rules in mind is a good place to start. Next thing up is portfolios. This is definitely a web developer thing. Not so much if you're in DevOps or something like that, but definitely for web developers and definitely for front-end developers. It's super, super common to spend a lot of time on portfolios and to spend a lot of time trying to really showcase yourself through these sort of micro projects. And then you put together 20 micro projects to make this really cool portfolio. It is, for some people, all you've got, but I definitely say, don't spend as much time on it. Try and reduce the amount of time spent there. 71% of hiring managers don't look at them at all. I'm definitely one of those. If I've ever had a chance of looking at a candidate, their portfolio didn't make or break it for me. And I tend to avoid them because there's so many false positives. Their resume, their portfolio looks great, but they're not that great. And 83% of hiring managers said it did not impact their final decision. So it was like, okay, took that into consideration, but it didn't impact it. So what do you do instead? Well, I would say definitely spend time building meaningful projects and not just these sort of example projects, not these demo projects. That last 10 or 20% of actually building something is where a lot of the great lessons are learned, a lot of the value comes, and a lot of the meaningful, exciting things that you can talk about in an interview come from. And so instead of just trying to quickly pump out products, really focus on the last 15, 20% and build something really meaningful. Something I've always said, and I'll say probably the next 5, 10 years until something changes, is try and build something and get 100, 200 users. And that might sound trivial, but in trying to get 100, 200 users, you're going to have to figure out a lot of things. For example, you might have to get authentication set up. You might have to get a beautiful landing page. You might have to message a lot of people. You might have to fix a lot of bugs. And all of the little problems that you have to solve when actually getting beyond your friends and family, but actually getting a couple hundred users, is where you actually build a really cool, meaningful skills that you can talk about in an interview, but also apply on the job, which I think is really cool. Like I said, build your own experience. If you have, imagine having a product with, 5,000 users. That's absolutely something you could put on your resume under the experience column and not under the projects column, because at that point, it's actually became sort of its own thing and actually has its own momentum. So definitely try and do that. Next up is people hire people. And again, this is probably the oldest saying in the book. But try, and especially in this digital world, move beyond that whenever possible. Don't just try and apply to 10 places or 20 places every day. Instead of trying to have 10 or 20 conversations, those are actually where interesting things happen. And I would say I don't have an exact metric here, but I would say 30 to 40% of jobs aren't posted. They're in people's heads, they're on their teams, there's a gap that they know they need to fill, but they're too busy, or logistics, they just can't go out and hunt people down. But if they have a really great conversation with somebody and they might know about a role, or they might think, hey, I actually have a need for that, your odds are actually way better than just randomly applying to random jobs. So actually having those conversations can sometimes be really, really useful. And this is where I think LinkedIn actually is super useful, because it is a great way of connecting with people who are really high up in your field. Again, maybe a tech lead or a staff level or an engineer, whatever the level is within your particular specialty, is a great way of sending them a message and saying, hey, I'd love to talk to you. And that's sort of the big takeaway of this particular kind of point, is try and have as many conversations every week as possible. I say 5 to 10 here. I think that's an easy place to start, because I don't have exact numbers on this, but I'd say for me, it's 5 to 10% success rate. If I message somebody, especially when in my career, saying, hey, I just want to talk. I just want to know what you do in your day-to-day job and maybe how I can improve. A lot of people are willing to talk about that. Let me move myself out of the way here. So this kind of example quote I have here is something very similar I've received. And every time I receive something that looks very similar to this, I'd say 93% of the time I get back, maybe 90%, I actually will reply and say, yeah, I'd love to chat. That's just my personality, but there's a lot of people who are like me. I'd love to chat if they received a message like this. So there's sort of the template, like, hey, so-and-so, I see you work wherever you work. It would be awesome to work there. Again, flattery. You are awesome. You're not selling something. You just want to learn from them. You want to hear what they're doing. I'd love to chat at some point and get some tips. I'm building my career, and I'd love to pick your brain. Again, you're smart. I want to learn from you. And then I know you're crazy busy. So again, acknowledging that they're busy. You're not abusing their time. You're being sympathetic to they've got a lot going on. But if you get 10 minutes to jump on a call, it'd mean the world to me. And again, the emphasis here is not to have a back and forth on LinkedIn, but to actually jump on a Zoom call and actually have that face-to-face time where you can actually ask them questions. And I could talk 4 or 5 hours about what that exact conversation looks like, but I would say there's probably 4 or 5 things you'd want to do on that conversation that are just no-brainers, non-negotiable. One of them is hey, what does your day-to-day look like? Just get them to open up, talk about what their day-to-day looks like, because they're probably doing a couple things while they're on the call. So this is a great way of getting them immediately engaged, for them to say, oh, okay, this person's actually curious about what I do. That's one thing. Second thing is to actually get them to look at your resume. Say, hey, keep my resume. I'd love for you to just give me any tips or tricks. Again, you're not selling them. You're not trying to get a job there. You're just trying to get some tips and tricks on your resume. The next one is getting their resume. Again, you don't have to do this at the beginning or at the end, but just at some point, getting their resume. So you can actually like compare notes and say, okay, this is what a tech lead's resume looks like. And actually see, in my field, this is what it looks like. That can be really incredibly useful. Another great question to ask is, hey, what does, interviewing look like at your company? Again, you're not trying to get a job there. You're just saying, what does it look like? What does the typical process look like? It gives you more exposure, but it also opens up the door if they're in a position where they are actively hiring for whatever reason. And again, the odds aren't like infinitely high, but always having that conversation going in that direction to where if they are in that position to where they are actively hiring, it can open it up for them to transition them to say, hey, I actually have your resume. You seem like you know what you're talking about. You seem very interested in what I'm doing. You seem like a really great culture fit, because that's what people think culture fit is they seem to be getting along with me. There seems to be a really great personality. Maybe it's a good fit for would you be interested in this role we have? And again, never once say, I'd like to work there, or can you give me a job? None of those things. Keep it short, keep it quick, 5 to 10 minutes at most. Be very sensitive to their time, get in and get out. But if you can consistently put together a bunch of these conversations every week, you're going to have a lot of success. And I think, again, job aside, you'll walk away with a lot of great connections and a lot of great people that you might connect with later once you have a job. You just never know. Always make great connections. You'll never know where it'll take you. Let's see here. Oh, I clicked away. There we go. Lead code still matters. Again, this is not for everything. Again, if you're like in DevOps or something, I don't know, but definitely in web development, lead code still matters. I know there's a lot of really great tools out there for helping navigate the algorithm side of things, some more ethical than others, but I would definitely say in the age of AI, there's no excuse to not be pretty good at LeetCode, because if nothing else, you can use it as a great tool for actually answering the tricky questions or having it explained to you in very simple ways. It's super duper important and no excuse to not be really good at it. Whenever I interview somebody and they don't know something that they should have known, my expectations are that much higher, because at this point, it's so easy to learn something. It's so easy to get access to that information. If you don't have access to it, I'm just not going to be very receptive to it. So kind of looking at some of the data here. So 81% of companies still use some type of algorithms in the interview process. That's maybe surprising for some of you. Maybe for others, you'll think it's higher. Some maybe don't do explicitly algorithms, but maybe they do some type of like technical interview where they actually have you do some type of coding exercise, but it's not necessarily explicitly an algorithm, but like, hey, just build this thing. So it may be a little bit different, still technical, but maybe not explicitly an algorithm. But it is surprising that 81% are still doing it. So don't think it's just, I don't need to do that, or what a waste of time. It's not super practical. Fair enough, but 81%, that's a big chunk to just throw out because you don't think it's worth your time. Invest the time and try and get really good at it. Companies who care about algorithms can and will grade harshly. I mean, if you want to work at a top 1% company, they're in a position where they've got 5, 10, 15,000 candidates. Like, they can and will hunt down the people who have the absolute best of best abilities to do these algorithms. Why not? Why not? If you've got the pick of the litter, why not be as strict as humanly possible? And so if you ever want to have that possibility of making that top 1%, then you have to kind of play by the rules and understand that. And to kind of shifting to the takeaways here, you can't just cram for, data structures and algorithms. That's just, I wish you could. I've tried. It just doesn't work. Unless you get extraordinarily lucky and the one that you cram for is the one that they show you, but you're not going to get lucky. That's just not the way things go. So if you actually want to consistently do well in interviews, you're going to have to kind of commit to a daily exercise. I would say at minimum doing one a day. Again, easy, medium, hard, but commit to doing one a day that will actually and consistently try and solve it. There's tips and tricks around that too. I'm not going to get into the weeds here, but I would definitely say if you commit to doing one a day, you'll be ahead of probably 90% of developers who are either actively employed or not actively looking, and they're getting rusty, and you'll be able to compete against them and have success because you're going to be the one actually working on this. And actually be very strategic. Don't just start going 1 to 5,000 on LeetCode, but actually spend time doing the research ahead of time. There's a ton of great lists out there. There's a Blind 75, there's a list of 50, there's a list of 20. I've got a list of 10. You can talk to a bunch of people and you can really focus on, okay, what is the really big things to learn? And again, with AI, you could say, hey, here's what I know how to do. Here's what I don't know how to do. What LeetCode should I work on? And it would actually give you very specific, detailed breakdown of the ones to work on. No reason to go and just start grinding. Be clever, be sophisticated, and just consistently start putting in the time. Next up, companies live in a bubble. And again, this is nothing against companies. I think this is I think just one of those realities that companies have their own problems. They're dealing with their own mess, and they're just trying to build the next thing and keep things moving. And it can be very easy for companies to kind of lose track of the exact environment. So if the cost of living doubled, it's not as though companies are immediately going to double how much they pay. And if it's really, really, really competitive out there, they're not immediately going to just start, doubling the interview process. So you kind of have to be a little bit aware of that going into it, that you have to have your own standards and not necessarily expect the company to immediately facilitate or be super, super sympathetic to your exact situation. They've got their own problems and they're going to do their own thing in their own way. So either find a company that magically matches your expectations, or be able to be in a situation where you can kind of negotiate with multiple companies. Because if you ever think you're just going to, you just think they're going to hand it to you, they're not. Those companies don't actually have a really clear, expectation of what they're going to give you. So that being said, most don't know what you're worth. I think that is a very fair statement. Some overvalue, some undervalue. I've had companies offer me very, 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 very little and be very, very, very proud of it. And they think they're overpaying you and they're underpaying you. So don't assume just because they give you an offer that it is a great offer. Go into any of these conversations knowing what you're worth and be the deciding factor, because ultimately they don't have to employ you if you don't say yes. So you have to say yes at some point and you don't have to say yes if you don't think it's worth it. Jot down ahead of time, here's the number it has to be, or I just can't move. Or if you're at an existing job, hey, here's the number it has to be. Or if you're trying to get your first job, hey, here's the number it has to be. And stick to it, because just because a company gives you an offer, it doesn't mean that A, it's their best offer, and B, that there are other companies that would love to work with you. So be able to declare ahead of time what you're worth and stand by it. So this is sort of, again, sort of an abbreviated version of this. I did go longer than I was hoping to, but really, really excited to hopefully follow up. If this is something you want to talk to me about, I could talk about this forever and forever and ever. Of course, my email, feel free to email me. Also, if you want to automate some of the stuff I've been talking about, we've just built into the tool, hackerrelay.com. Of course, it's me always pitching something, but that is actually where we integrated a lot of these tips and tricks, so you don't have to do the work. You don't have to go and scrape the jobs or look at the jobs. You don't actually have to do the work on the algorithms or pick out the top 10. We've done a lot of that work for you, so that way you can just kind of show up and start building and making yourself more hireable. But either way, let's talk. I'd love to chat. Feel free to DM me or email me, and I'll talk to you then.